Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, just a few moments ago, President Putin had finished his address to the nation and the signing ceremony with the leaders of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics and the Kherson and Zaporozhye Oblasts, essentially signing treaties on their accession into the Russian Federation. So after this, these treaties go to the Russia's constitutional court, that they will determine whether it passes constitutional muster, and then it will go to the State Duma, and then to the upper chamber. They will presumably sign off on it, and then that'll be done. That'll be legally and constitutionally. It will have been accomplished that these four regions will be a part of the Russian Federation. So Russia will have acquired 8 million new citizens, which is very important for Russia. And of course, new areas which are also economically important, the Donbass. So this was a fiery speech by Putin. Things, of course, he said many times before, but it's now quite explicit, the hostility toward the West, and the condemnation of the West, which is now, in terms of ferocity, as ferocious as anything uttered in the heyday of the Soviet Union, the heyday of the Comintern, the heyday of Stalin and Molotov. Even when Khrushchev used to talk about peaceful coexistence, I mean, there was no peaceful coexistence talk here. And of course, he in many ways also went back to the Soviet era, about how the Soviet Union had been in the forefront of the liberation of the subjugated peoples of the world, who had been subjugated by Western colonialism, and basically that this Western need to dominate the world, which has been going on for centuries and continues to this day. So it was basically a very implacable speech. And then, of course, he told the Ukrainians, the Kiev authority rather, that come back to the negotiating table. But essentially, once these are now going to be within days part of the Russian Federation, then the Ukrainian forces within Donetsk and Luhansk, any Ukrainian forces will be regarded as an invasion force and will be met as one meets an invasion force with extreme force. So clearly, one chapter of this war has come to an end. So I don't know what well, our friends, quote unquote, at Responsible Statecraft are going to do, because they've been talking about Minsk, returning to Minsk. Minsk. We got to get back to Minsk because there's no more Minsk. I mean, that's it. The part of the Russian Federation. Russians make clear we're talking as little about them as we're talking about Crimea. So we kind of want to a new phase of the conflict. Anyway, what was your take, Peter?
Well, very good summation as usual. I think the first word that came to my mind was resolve. Okay, and I mean, there's no ambiguity here. Okay, for all intents and purposes, Russia is a bigger country right now. Okay, I mean, the rest of it is just bureaucratic. I don't see how there could be possibly any barriers. We already have the litmus test of Crimea, so that's a template. Okay. What I think it was the most interesting speech Putin has given since the Munich Security Conference in 2007. But this went way beyond. I mean, if you look, he started with the very central part of the induction of these new regions into Russia. Very straightforward. But then he did give a critique of the Soviet Union when it comes to self-determination. He didn't mention Gorbachev's name, but there was a very strong criticism of a Soviet leader, which of course that was of Gorbachev, about the self-determination of people. Mm-hmm. within the Soviet Union. And then he kind of moves further back. And with something that I think was very interesting is that these are historic Russian lands. These are Russian people. They have the same traditions, same religion, same historical memory. You know, it's fixing historical wrongs, okay? But it's not doing it, and then this is what we're gonna hear, responsible statecraft and all the other ones, okay? These people had referendum, okay, it's a sham referendum, fine, okay? You know, you can't have referendum during times of military conflict. Well, they did it in Afghanistan and Ukraine. So I mean, in Iraq. I'm tired of your white noise. Okay, these people made a, and these are people that understand what democracy is, what democratic institutions are. They know what representation means. Okay, it's something that very tenuous in Iraq at the time, certainly so in Afghanistan today. So I don't need to hear that, you know, double talk from these people. And then, and this is something George and I at the Gaggle here have kind of touched upon over the last week or so, is this Western colonialism. This has gotten right back into the Russian discourse. What a year ago, we wouldn't really hear these kinds of things, okay? And then talking about what happens when you test and challenge Western hegemony. Again, using the word hegemony even 4 or 5 months ago wasn't in the lexicon. This has come back, okay? And this is also a speech to the world. You know, it's just not to the Russians. It's to, you know, we know what you feel. We know what this feels like. Okay. That's right. Then making that reference to, you know, getting Russian and Ukrainian grain to the world. Well, it went to rich people. Okay. As usual. And that would be, and I would agree with that. And so, and then also, I think really quite interestingly, and I've always talked about since George and I established the Gaggle, is that, you know, Russia is a civilizational alternative. Well, that was on steroids this time, okay? Criticism of postmodernism, of wokeism, and again, using the same language that George and I have been using ever since we established this podcast, you know, a criticism of neoliberalism. So very much so that and then the veneration of Russian history, culture, and it had to be said because of the denigration that Russia has experienced for years and years and years. This kind of stuff never came out during the Cold War, George. Never, okay? They're not this personal, this visceral, this petty, okay? So it was resolve. You lay a finger on these new republics, you're going to hear from us. We had today a convoy was leaving Ukrainian-controlled land, going into Russian-controlled land, and 23 people, as of when we're speaking, were killed. I think 34. And that got a lot of press, and I'm basically saying this isn't going to happen anymore. And if you do it, the reaction will be swift and hard and without any apology. So this is where we are. This is a very historic day, but we're in a very dangerous time. Our good friend Stoltenberg has, you know, gathered his minions around him, and apparently, maybe as we're speaking right now, he's going to give a rebuttal. I would well imagine the presser was called, a meeting was called, but with unspecified content, what the subject would be. Obviously, we know what it is going to be. We're going to hear their response, but fearless, absolutely fearless, and basically staying the course.
Right. No, exactly right. Incidentally, that issue of the convoy, which of course is once again blamed on Russia. Why Russia would attack a convoy of
going to Russia?
But of course, exactly the same thing was done during Yugoslavia, when they started saying bombing, you know, when the refugee convoy was bombed by the Serbs. Well, it made very little sense for the Serbs to bomb it, because of course it was going again into Serbia. Why would the Serbs want to bomb a refugee convoy that's going into Serbia? Who had the motive to bomb, you know? NATO, because NATO wanted to see refugee convoys heading out of the country to bolster their propaganda that everyone's fleeing the Serbs. But you know, but that's, be that as you may. Well,
my reaction, I was thinking about if Putin would make reference to the Nord Stream pipelines, which of course he did, and how foolish and mindless. The Europeans heed American hegemony at their own expense. But when I was thinking about it, walking the dogs, as I do, I was thinking, George and I now have a perfect retort to these. So Nord Stream 2 was blown up by the Russians. This convoy trying to make its way into Russian occupied territory, the Russians did this. So I have a perfect retort, George, and we could have used it a lot. You know what? Kennedy actually killed himself, George. He killed himself, all right? Like that's the true history, because that's what they want us to believe. They want us to believe the most ludicrous things.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely absurd.
That's right. And incidentally, it's slightly off topic, but just so that I don't forget, so a Gagler suggested that with these territories of Ukraine kind of opting to join the Russian Federation, is Russia's answer to NATO's claim that anyone can join, that the door is open, the right to join NATO is sacrosanct. Yeah, well, the right to join the Russian Federation is sacrosanct. We have an open door policy.
Bravo, Gagler. Thank you very much. It really means that you understand what George and I are talking about every time we can convene together.
Right, yeah.
I think that I was maybe expecting a little bit maybe more specifics on how Russia is going to be dealing with the West. But I think you never show your cards.
No.
And so I think basically they're going to see what the reaction is going to be. There's going to be a reaction. I really would hope it would be something of substance instead of just, hair on fire nonsense we've heard over and over again. But, one of the interesting things that I've talked about with you and on my program is that this will serve, most likely, is a demonstration effect, because Odessa is a really sore point, okay, to this day, after the Union building was attacked, ransacked, and burnt many of its occupants. And that's something that's very visceral, it's very raw here, and it's within Russia's grasp. But another thing that wasn't mentioned, there wasn't a mention of altering the description or mission of the special military operation. That was kind of left hanging in the air. Right?
That's right, and that wasn't mentioned, which suggests that they, at least for the time being, they're sticking to that formulation, which I think isn't going to make much sense once their accession to the Russian Federation is an accomplished fact, because then it's no longer a special military operation. It's about liberation of your own territory. That means that's war. So I think that's probably will be coming. I also thought that there might be some issuing of an ultimatum, that there's a lot of speculation he would issue an ultimatum to Kiev, but in fact he was relatively conciliatory. He said that they should return to the negotiating table, but the issue of these four regions, that's off the table, as is Crimea, is off the table.
I think, the way I read it is, Lisa said, you can come back to the table, but there are no guarantees, okay? And certainly we're not going to talk about the accession of these four new republics. That's certainly not, it's a non-starter.
Right.
Essentially, because of the behavior of the Zelensky and his gang, they're not worth talking to, okay? Right. And so the only decision maker in all of this, no, it's not Liz Truss, everyone who could be thrown out of power in early October, okay? It's possible, it's possible. It's obviously Washington. So we'll see, these mandarins of the universe, Jake Sullivan and Blinken, to see what they have to say.
And that's interesting, because later this afternoon, there's another important event taking place, which is the UN Security Council debate on the attack on the Nord Stream 1 and 2. Now, that'll be quite interesting, whether the Western powers will formally accuse Russia of having perpetrated this, because of course, the attack dogs, in the media attack dogs, have already done this. Like Natasha Bertrand, one of the leading purveyors of Russiagate. She's now, she keeps being kicked upstairs. So she's now at CNN, and she's already put out the story, well, there is evidence that the Russians were in the vicinity in the recent
Show me
past.
the evidence.
Yeah,
Never,
sure,
any evidence.
exactly.
Never any evidence. Never any evidence.
No,
But there was evidence there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. That's evidence that I can verify. But everything else.
Right. I see the scenario, which is they're going to have an investigation, but it'll be like an MH17 investigation, which is in-house. It'll just be the United States, the UK, Sweden,
Poland.
Poland and Ukraine will take part in the investigation. Russia, whose property it is, will be excluded from the investigation. I mean, Russia is the victim in all of this, but they will be excluded from the investigation. And then they'll come out with their report, probably accusing Russia, or maybe they'll say it's inconclusive. But if they do accuse Russia and will ask for the evidence, they say, it's so classified. This information is so classified that even I can't see it. Even we, the investigators, were unable to see it. So, that I think that's what they're going to say. Because obviously people are going to ask, well, where's your evidence? And I say, it's too classified for anyone to see.
Isn't it really interesting is that, we'll never really know, but every time we come across, we really will never know is a cover-up, obviously. Okay.
Right.
I mean, the leaking of the abortion ruling, I'm like you said, what, it's like 24, 30 people. Well, we'll never know. We'll never know.
It must be fewer than that. The Supreme Court doesn't have such a big staff, and the number of people who have
origins of COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Never know.
Yeah. No, I think that's that. So I think that's going to be later, and of course, the West is going to be talking about illegal sham referendums, but it doesn't really matter what they say because it's too late for that, because of course Russia then can come back and make all the appropriate points. Yeah, but what about Kosovo? What about Yugoslavia, and so on and so forth? But it's no longer matters. These arguments are just we can you can go to the seminar room at a university and have these very interesting arguments. But here we're just simply accepting realpolitik. It's over. It's a done deal. We're not arguing about this anymore.
You argue with a loaded gun?
Right.
No.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't even pay attention to all of these, protestations and everything else. Okay, it is grounded in international law. Now, this is shaky territory. I mean, because we could look at Kosovo and all of that. To what degree does self-determination trump sovereignty? That's it's a big question.
Well, exactly.
Okay?
But
arguments to be made.
There are arguments to be made, and but the point is that the West did it. The West perpetrated this. They did this in Yugoslavia. They did this in Kosovo, and then they tried to get around it by saying, "Oh, well, it's unique." They kept saying Kosovo is sui generis. They never really explained what makes Kosovo unique, other than, hey, this is a secession that works in our favor, whereas other secessions don't work in our favor. But the fact is that we've had these cases when India and Pakistan. I mean, India intervened in the civil war in East Pakistan and essentially lopped off East Pakistan from West Pakistan and then created the state of Bangladesh. So it's happened before. Everyone now has accepted the independent state of Bangladesh. So that's it. So you can go on. It's illegal. You can read this stuff on antiwar.com. It is illegal. It is illegal. And so okay, you can go on until your voice goes hoarse. It's illegal. It doesn't matter.
Well, I mean,
who determines it's illegal?
Right. And who's the punisher? Okay.
Right.
Okay, and the Iraq was illegally invaded in 2003. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm not going to keep banging my head on the wall on that one. Okay?
Exactly. What's the point? You can keep saying it's illegal. I'm not saying and the Americans will listen. Fine. Keep saying it's illegal. You think they care?
But this goes back to Putin's address to the nation and to the world, is that you can use all these arguments you want, okay, but it's not going to affect how we determine our security. Right. Because he even mentioned, and I think that these low octane thinkers in London and Washington and Brussels, and he talks about the indivisibility of security. I mean, do they even know what that means? And that trumps everything. You got a chance. and now the floodgates are open, and you're sowing you're getting what
reaping what you sow. Yeah.
Right. And it's as simple as that. Again, the word resolve really stuck with me listening to the whole thing. And it's one of the, I don't think there's any other leader in the world that can do such a global thing. I mean, he covered an enormous amount of territory.
Exactly. No, I think it is very interesting how he has essentially created this unbroken line of continuity between the Soviet Union, what the Soviet Union was trying to do, and Russia. So he says, no, we're not going to recreate the Soviet Union. That's over. Like just like Donetsk and Luhansk, and that's over. But he did say, look, the Soviet Union was set upon, as was Russia many times in its history, going back, the 18th century, 17th century, 19th century, 20th century. It was set upon. It was set upon after the Bolsheviks took power, with the Allied intervention. It was set upon by Hitler, and then of course there was the Cold War, which was also basically the attempting to break up the country.
And the West predatory behavior in the 1990s.
Exactly. He made it. West predatory. Exactly. That's right.
And everyone, to keep in mind, I remember my parents. My parents grew up during the Great Depression. To the end of their lives, that was the seminal moment of how they made reference to the world. The 1990s still today in Russia is a reference point, okay? And to use a historical reference, a time of troubles, and this was the time of troubles, right. And it's not forgotten. Right. And people, young people, young Russians say, "What do you think of Putin?" Because they want to be cool and liberal and all that. And I say, well, when you were born, it was a pretty bad place. Now you're 20. It's right. A much better place. Then ask your parents. Right. Okay.
Right. So, but as you say, it is a resolve, and he's basically telling the West, well, we've now drawn a line in the sand. You are free to escalate. You can go ahead. If you're ready now to go to war, we are ready for that. I mean, in other words, he's leaving open the possibility that NATO will get directly involved in this war, and Russia saying, well, we are ready for this. Remember the partial mobilization. That's just the first step. I mean, once you've gone down this path, if necessary, you can go on mobilizing. I mean, 300,000 is really just a drop in the ocean. I mean, Russia is a big country, and there's a lot of manpower. I mean, obviously Russia doesn't want to do it, but once you've done this, they say, okay, that's the first step. If you want to escalate, go ahead, escalate. It's up to you how far you want to take this.
It's really important to point out, it's extremely important, is that these 4 new republics of Russia, this isn't something made up in someone's imagination. This is a place where people have relatives. I was looking at kind of a montage of over the last 8 years, and maybe if you're not from there, you're not going to pick up on something that's very, very, it's not very subtle. It's not subtle to me, is that I see these bombed hospitals and schools and apartment buildings. But George, those are exactly like apartments in Moscow. That's what schools look like in Moscow. It's very, very close. And so, for the Russian people, we have to protect our brethren. That's what historically we do. We take care of ourselves, okay? And when push comes to shove, they do a pretty good job of it, okay? Yeah. Unless their leaders absolutely portray them like in the Tsar.
There was about a couple of weeks ago, one of our friends at Responsible Statecraft wrote an article saying that, yes, there are going to be referendums in these 4 regions, but there's still a chance for peace, because Putin did not actually say that these territories will be incorporated within the Russian Federation. He didn't actually say it. So there's still an opening here for peace. Now, you have to be bloody stupid to say something like that. I mean, the whole idea that the Russian government would encourage them to have a referendum, and then once they've had the referendum, to tell them, hey, you're not coming in here. In other words, leave them essentially hanging around, as subject to attack, and that would be a real betrayal of people. You say have a referendum, but you can't actually come in to our country. I mean, but that's just a level of the sort of the fantasy world in which the West inhabits. They go on about, oh, this particular battle or that particular battle. Oh, Russia, Ukrainians are doing very well at Lyman and so on. You don't realize the whole situation has completely changed. I mean, it's not it. These territories are now lost forever. You lost the war. You've lost all this territory. You didn't need to lose it. You've lost it.
And your unicorn Ukraine is shrinking. Okay. Right. Okay. Yes. Just to amplify the point. Yeah, I saw the same article. Just people get paid to do that. Know that. Okay. Probably well. Yeah, so they'll have a referendum and there'll be a hiatus, and Putin can decide, it's a bargaining chip, Oh, so the 6,000 troops that Russia has lost already doesn't mean anything. The almost 15,000 people that lost their lives in the Donbass over the 8 years, that means nothing too. I mean, what kind of idiot writes that kind of stuff?
Exactly. And the whole idea, I mean, precisely because the Russians have actually felt very guilty for 8 years, that they allowed essentially their people who had wanted to join the Russian Federation in 2014, and instead they were allowed to be the victims of perpetual shelling from Kiev. So 13, 14, 15,000 of them were killed. So they already feel guilty about that. Now they're just going to leave 8 million people in limbo to be again attacked. And this time even worse, because now the Ukraine has all this NATO weaponry at their disposal. So I mean, it is just a fantasy world, but that's part of the sort of Western commentary. We talked yesterday about this article by Professor Stephen Walt of Harvard professor. He is the leading exponent of the realist school of foreign policy thinking. Whoa. So his whole article was, we read it, but Russia has lost this war, but this is not the time for Western hubris. Really, Russia has lost this war. I mean, you just had this major shift in territory. Ukraine basically has shrunk, lost all these people, lost important territory, and Russia has lost the war. You have to be a really smart Harvard professor to come to that conclusion.
And NATO's been spat at, okay? So it's one of these things that George and I have picked up on. To let everybody know, during the day, sometimes we send articles back and forth. And it's really, haven't you noticed how a lot of these smart people, they actually argue against their own position, right. and then their conclusion is something very different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Essentially, what's wrong with hegemony, how it's counterproductive, it's against democratic values, against any kind of definition of sovereignty, and then they just fall back on, but we're the good guys and we know best. I mean, it really is irritating to me, because as George and I have said, and I think they kind of encapsulated, it's just different ways to approach hegemony, okay? And it's like one of the criticisms I had, a person I will not name, someone that is like peace activist and anti-interventionist, and I threw back at him and I just said, no, you're American exceptionalism light. That's what you are. And this is like, hegemony light, okay? It's how we use our hegemony, okay? We can use it for good purposes, okay? It's all nonsense. And like I said, they argue against themselves. They degrade their own argument before they just cast it out.
No, that's right. Because if they accept 1 minute that NATO has been expanding, despite the fact that Russia kept warning and warning and warning for years, don't do this, and particularly on Ukraine, don't do it. So they accept that. Oh yeah, no, it was a mistake. Yeah, we should really, expand. It wasn't the smartest move. Then how does Russia's launching the special military operations? How can it be unjustified and unprovoked? How can it be unprovoked if Russia has been saying, don't do this? I mean, somebody keeps telling you, don't do it. And you still go on doing it, well, it's not unprovoked. And so they say, okay, well, this is unjust, illegal, immoral, and so on. Well, no, I mean, they were basically, this was something that was a fundamental security concern of Russia's. So they don't know what do they want to argue. I mean, they want to be seen as, well, I'm a critic of U.S. foreign policy. I'm critical. But in fact, you accept the premises, which is, hey, we have a right to do this. We have a right to expand NATO because we're the good guys, and NATO is the good guys.
What they try to do is they try to explain it away. Okay, yes, it was a mistake, and it was we've been warned and all this. But then they say it is what it is. Right. Okay, and right. That's not a coherent debating point. No. Okay. And again, it's like Burrell. He spends so much time on this is not true. This is not. Yep. Why are you spending so much time on things that aren't true? Why don't you talk about what should be?
Right. Okay. Right. Well, no, and that's it. And that's why this is the West is just living in this delusional world because Professor Stephen Wald of Harvard University is supposed to be. He's the realist, he's the restrained person, he's the diplomacy person. So, he's not one of the neocons. I mean, not one of the people who's saying, hey, let's just do in Russia because Russia is the fount of evil. No, he's supposed to be a realist. And what does he do? He accepts essentially all of the premises of, the NATO advocates. I mean, he accepts all of them, and therefore, he arrives at conclusions that are just simply quibbling. There's no critique here. It's just quibbling. It's quibbling. Oh, I mean, shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have done that. But it's quibbling. It's not actually a critique of Western foreign policy.
You may disagree with me on this one here, but I mean, it's like Leszek Kolakowski wrote a wonderful 3-volume history of Marxism. I think it'll never be outdone. I think it was brilliant. But when you read about the Trotskyites and the Luxemburgists and the Bukharianites and the Stalin, they're all communists. Okay? I mean, that's how kind of I look at it. All right. I mean, intellectually, the nuances, that's fine. That's for George and I to talk about, because it stimulates us. Okay. But at the end of the day, you're talking about the same thing, and this is what Walt does all the time. He's trying to thread a needle in something that there's no material difference. Okay, right. You're just an apologist in a nice way for hegemony. Right. Okay, that's it. George and I say it is wrong. It creates bad outcomes for everyone. Look at the American people. They send billions and billions and billions to Ukraine, right? And they don't even have health care in America. I mean,
right. No, I think that's right. And I think that was an interesting thing about that point about the Kolakowski is that you can go on with these debates with Kautsky and Bernstein and Luxemburg and then Trotsky and the Bukharianites and so on, but ultimately what prevailed was Stalin. Why did Stalin prevail? Yeah. Because he knew about power. He knew about how you win power and then how you hold on to power and how you use power. And then it doesn't matter, these critiques like, Stalin's understanding of Marxist theory was very, very superficial. He really didn't understand all the subtleties. He didn't have the intellect of Trotsky. Whoa, he must have been lamented that he didn't have the intellect of Trotsky. Yeah, but he knew how to get power and he knew how to hold on to power. That's what matters, not writing great theoretical treatises.
You don't have to be an intellectual to tell somebody to go with an ice axe to go to Mexico City to finish it. Okay, because that's about power. George is absolutely right. Okay, right. And this is what the entire quote unquote foreign policy blob is. That's all they do is they try to. Their primary mission is to safeguard and perpetuate hegemony. Okay, and there's a lot of people that make a lot of money off of it. Okay, but it just kind of go full circle. Putin's speech was that. And what's interesting to me, my last point here is that it was a speech to and an appeal to the global South. They're doing it to us. We know they did it to you. Okay, they became rich because of what they did to you. Okay.
No, No, it's right, and that's why it's so bizarre. You know, the West thing, but we're so powerful that they're bound to come around to us because we have all the money, we have the power, we have the influence, the financial, the capital, and so on. And therefore, you know, India, China, they're bound to, you know, abandon Russia and come to us. But that isn't how it works. I mean, if you remember World War II, all the colonial subjects were kind of watching this with great interest, you know, saying, well, this is nice. I mean, these Western powers who have hegemony over us are basically killing and destroying one another. That can only be good for us, which is why,
and it was
exactly so. Which is why the British were surprised that India wasn't really taking sides in World War II. I mean, because they were quite happy to see British power destroyed. So now, in the same way, they look at the Western powers, the NATO powers, and they're shooting themselves in the foot or shooting themselves in the lungs, as Viktor Orban put it. They say, "Hey, that's not bad for us." Then they want to destroy themselves. They want to destroy their material base. Okay, by me.
And also in the speech, I just want to reiterate is about this what values really are, and I thought that was really well said in the speech, because Putin spoke in terms of values that the vast majority of humanity hold. Okay. Not this postmodern nonsense wokeism, okay? And that's making a direct civilizational appeal, which I think was very, very smart, okay? Very smart. And essentially saying, we are not like them. And we know, to invoke Bill Clinton, I know your pain. I can feel your pain.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think it was very much a kind of invocation of what the Soviet Union did during the Cold War, because that's why the Soviet Union actually had exerted considerable amount of appeal and influence in what was then called the Third World, even though many of these countries, they didn't like communism and had nothing in common with Russia, but they kind of liked the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was essentially articulating their own kind of anti-colonial, anti-Western sentiments. The Soviet Union had good relations with Saudi Arabia. I mean, here's this, Islamist backwater royalty, absolutely, the most unegalitarian, unsocialist place in the world. But nonetheless, they had good relations with the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was able to articulate their aspirations. And that Russia was Putin was invoking that spirit. He said, hey, these countries, they have nothing in common with the West. They're very happy to cooperate with us because they regard us as long-standing friends.
And I want to say, plagiarize you again, okay? It's very interesting too, is that in the speech, I think it was it was a bit subtle, but Russia is taking on the entire, we have a new phrase now, collective West. We keep hearing that, collective West, collective West. And that's a message to the Chinese. Look, we're doing the heavy carrying. We're doing the carrying the heavy water for all of you, okay?
Yes.
And that's a very important message that he was sending out. So,
that's a very important point, because if you're a Russian, but you're thinking, why are we always doing all the heavy lifting? We've been doing the heavy lifting for years now. And China just basically gets a free ride. I mean, they come along and say, we've got to, we will still pursue peace and so on. But hey, I mean, you're the beneficiary of this. You're the beneficiary of essentially a multipolar world, a transfer of power from the West to other parts of the world. You're the big beneficiary, and yet it's Russia that has to do all the heavy lifting. So it is kind of a little bit tiresome, as we said before, like the Collective Security Treaty Organization, in which Russia continually bails out, whether it's Armenia or Kazakhstan or Belarus, and then, hey, well, we're kind of taking a neutral stance in all of this. We're not taking any position on this. Hey, well, next time you're in trouble, don't bother calling us to help you out.
I think it's important as we close here, George. It's very important. Everyone, this is a very dangerous time, extremely dangerous. I would say the most dangerous since the special military operation started, because we had the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. That is that is a declaration of war, okay? And the Russians are going to react in their own way, in their own time. They will not, they're not going to be like Khrushchev's using his shoe at the United Nations, but there will be a reaction. And also keep in mind that pipeline, not only was it a real physical thing connecting Russia to Europe, but it was one of the last things that did connect the two, and that has been destroyed. So we're kind of, the gauntlet has been thrown down. And considering the hysterics that we get from Western media and this so-called foreign policy experts, I'm waiting for their reaction, and it's not going to be pleasant. I just wonder if it'll be of any substance. And if necessary, if George has the time tomorrow, and if I have time tomorrow, we'll do a reaction to it.
Right. No, I think so. We're going to do a reaction, and I think also the UN Security Council debate. Right. On the pipelines, and it'd be interesting what line the Western powers are going to take during this debate. Are they actually going to accuse Russia formally? A totally kind of preposterous position. Why would the victim of an attack perpetrate the attack against himself? I mean, you have to do some really convoluted, logical kind of leaping.
They do it.
They can do it.
They can do it.
And I don't doubt that they're going to try to do it. But anyway, that and we'll see how the West react. But ultimately, the West can just huff and puff. But you'd have to then say, okay, what are you going to do? Are you ready to get involved yourself? I mean, because ultimately, they've been sending all these arms to Ukraine, but they're running out of arms. The next batch of arms has to actually be made. You have to actually go to the factory and make it. So it's going to be time. It's going to be some time before they actually get to Kiev. Right. So therefore, they have to decide: are you going to get directly involved, or what are you going to do?
Or said differently, going back to the great philosopher of the 20th and 21st century, Clint Eastwood. Make my day. All right, everybody going to keep an eye on this, okay? You're going to start going through your withdrawal. George doesn't have a live stream until Tuesday, so look at reruns, okay? Something.
Look, exactly, that's it. That's a very well put. Yeah, look at reruns, trying to, try to survive this brutal weekend, this nightmare of having, oh God, 48 hours of no live streaming. God, I can't take it. So, but anyway, the next live stream, Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. There's little buddy. Think about that little tip jar. So on your way out the door, see if they've got a few bob in your pocket. And
reduced to eating ice.
Exactly, he's reduced to eating ice. He wants a little bit of pocket money. So if you have that, make sure he has some pocket money to survive. We're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can invest in new technology, and we can make Buddy's life a little bit more comfortable. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.